The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after my father's funeral. I was still living in that fog of grief where everything felt muted and distant, where I moved through the world like I was underwater. The subject line read, "Family meeting, urgent." It was from my Uncle Richard, my father's younger brother, and the executor of the estate. I should have known something was wrong when I walked into the conference room at Henderson and Associates, the law firm that had handled our family's affairs for 3 generations. Uncle Richard sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by my Aunt Patricia and my cousin Derek. Their lawyer, Mr. Brennan, occupied the seat to Richard's right. The only chair left for me was at the opposite end, isolated and symbolic. "Thank you for coming, Maya," Uncle Richard said, not quite meeting my eyes. He was a softer version of my father, with the same broad shoulders, but none of the warmth that had defined Dad. "We need to discuss your father's business. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content." The business, Sterling Digital Solutions, the software consulting firm my father had built from nothing over 25 years. I'd grown up in that office, doing my homework in the conference rooms, learning to code on the company's first computers. After getting my computer science degree, I joined full-time 5 years ago, working my way up from junior developer to head of the innovation department. It wasn't nepotism. I'd earned every promotion, often working twice as hard as anyone else to prove I deserved to be there. "What about it?" I asked, my voice hoarse from weeks of crying. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat and slid a document across the table. "Your father's will stipulates that the business assets are to be divided among his surviving family members. As his brother and business partner, Richard inherits controlling interest. Patricia and Derek receive significant shares as well." I stared at the paper, the words blurring together. "And me? You inherit the house," Uncle Richard said quickly, "and your father's personal effects. The car, some investments. But not the business." It wasn't a question. "The business requires someone with management experience." Aunt Patricia interjected, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You're so young, Maya, only 28. Your father wouldn't have wanted you burdened with such responsibility during your grief." Something cold settled in my chest. "I've been working there for 5 years. I run an entire department." "A small department," Derek said, speaking for the first time. He was 2 years older than me, had dropped out of college twice, and had been hired by my father 3 years ago in what I now recognized as an act of family charity. He worked in sales, poorly. "The innovation team is what, 4 people? That's not the same as running a multi-million-dollar company." "Your father and I discussed this extensively," Uncle Richard said, and I caught the lie in the slight twitch of his left eye. My father had taught me to spot tells when we played poker on Sunday nights. He wanted to ensure the business stayed in capable hands. "We're prepared to offer you a position, of course. We wouldn't want you to feel abandoned." "A position," I repeated numbly. Mr. Brennan slid another document toward me. "A consultancy role. You'd work on special projects as needed. Given the company's current financial situation, we can't offer a salary right now, but it would keep you engaged with the business your father loved. Keep you busy during this difficult time." The words hit me like a physical blow. Work for free. They were asking me to work for free at the company my father had built, the company I'd helped grow, while they divided the profits among themselves. "The financial situation?" I managed to ask. Uncle Richard sighed dramatically. "Your father made some poor investments in the last year. We're in a precarious position. Everyone will need to make sacrifices." I knew the company's financials. I'd sat in on quarterly reviews. We'd had our best year ever, with a 15% increase in revenue. This was a lie, but I was too shocked, too grief-stricken to fight. "Think about it," Aunt Patricia said, her red nails drumming on the table. "You wouldn't want to dishonor your father's memory by abandoning his life's work, would you?" That night, I sat in my father's study, surrounded by his books and the faint smell of his cologne that still clung to the leather chair. I pulled out the business documents I'd inherited with the house, the ones in his personal safe. Tax returns, financial statements, strategic plans written in his careful handwriting. The company wasn't struggling, it was thriving. And in the margins of a document dated 2 months before his heart attack, I found notes in my father's handwriting, Update will. Maya. Majority share. She's ready. Tell her about the expansion plans. He'd meant to change the will. He'd meant to leave me the company. But he died suddenly, at 53, before he could make it official. And Uncle Richard, who'd been the beneficiary of the old will from when I was still a teenager, had said nothing. I could have fought it, could have hired lawyers, contested the will, argued that my father's intentions were clear, but I was exhausted. Grief had hollowed me out. My mother had died when I was 12, and now my father was gone too. I had no one left to fight for, no one to fight with, so I signed their papers. I agreed to work as an unpaid consultant. And I showed up to Sterling Digital Solutions the following Monday with my head held high and my heart full of broken glass. The first week was humiliating in small ways. My office, the corner space with windows overlooking the city that my father had given me 2 years ago, had been reassigned to Derek. I was moved to a windowless interior room that had previously been used for storage. My title was changed from head of Dalmer Innovation to Special Projects Consultant. My team reported to Derek now, and I watched him take credit for projects I'd initiated, proposals I'd written, code I'd debugged. But I said nothing. I came in early and stayed late, working on the special projects they assigned me, which were really just grunt work nobody else wanted to do. Data cleanup, documentation updates, legacy code review. By the second week, the rumors had started. I heard them in the break room, in the bathrooms, whispered in hallways. Poor Maya, so sad. Her father must have known she wasn't cut out for real leadership. That's why he left the business to Richard. She's just here because they feel sorry for her. Uncle Richard played the benevolent patriarch, publicly praising my dedication, while privately ensuring I was excluded from all important meetings. Aunt Patricia, who'd been given some vague VP title despite never having worked a day there before, redecorated my father's office and removed every trace of him. Derek strutted around like he owned the place, making decisions that contradicted our established strategies and driving away two of our best clients with his aggressive sales tactics. I endured it all. I showed up, I did the work, I spoke politely, I swallowed my rage and my grief and my sense of injustice, and I turned it into fuel because while they were congratulating themselves on their cleverness, I was paying attention. I noticed when Derek started coming in late, leaving early, taking long lunches that reeked of alcohol. I observed when Uncle Richard began steering contracts toward a new vendor, a company called Pinnacle Solutions. I watched when Aunt Patricia hired her unqualified friends into positions that had been filled by competent employees who mysteriously quit or were let go. And I documented everything, quietly, carefully, without telling a soul. 3 weeks into my unpaid servitude, I discovered the real reason for my exile. I was organizing old files in my storage room office when I found a folder that had been misfiled, probably by someone cleaning out my old space. Inside was a proposal I'd written 6 months ago, a comprehensive plan for expanding our services into AI-assisted development tools. It was cutting edge, potentially worth millions. My father had loved it, had planned to make it our flagship initiative. The proposal was stamped with Derek's name now. He'd presented it to the board, I learned from the meeting notes, claiming he'd been working on it for months. The board had approved a significant budget for development. Derek was being hailed as a visionary. My work, my vision, stolen and rebranded. That night, I allowed myself to cry. Not for the injustice, but for my father, who would have been horrified to see what his brother was doing to his legacy, to his daughter, to the company he'd built with such care. But then I dried my eyes and got to work. I started cataloging everything systematically. The contracts Richard was directing to Pinnacle Solutions, which I discovered was partially owned by his wife's brother. The budget discrepancies, where money approved for development was being diverted to consulting fees and operational expenses that didn't align with any real operations. Derek's plagiarism of not just my work, but proposals from other team members, the wrongful terminations, including Lisa Chen, our head of HR, who'd been fired after questioning some of Patricia's hiring decisions. I compiled it all into a detailed report, backed by documents, emails, and financial records that I'd quietly copied or that had been carelessly left accessible. I wasn't planning revenge. I was simply recording the truth like a scientist documenting an experiment. The breaking point came exactly 3 months after that first terrible meeting. I arrived at the office to find my team, my former team, looking devastated. Sarah, my most talented developer, had tears streaming down her face. "What happened?" I asked. "Derek fired Marcus and Jen," she said. "Marcus was our senior architect, brilliant and dedicated. Jen was our UX designer, whose work had won industry awards. He said they were underperforming, but Maya, they were the best. They were carrying the whole department since Derek took over." I knew why they'd really been fired. Marcus had questioned Derek's understanding of the AI project, my project, in a meeting. Jen had politely corrected Patricia about user interface standards. They'd committed the sin of knowing more than their incompetent bosses. "And he's hiring his girlfriend to replace Jen," Sarah continued. "She has a degree in art history. She's never worked in UX. She doesn't even know what Figma is." That afternoon, there was a company-wide meeting. Uncle Richard announced that due to market conditions, there would be no bonuses this year. This despite the record profits I knew the company had earned. Employees who'd worked 12-hour days, who'd sacrificed time with their families, would get nothing while Richard drove a new Porsche and Patricia wore a different designer outfit every day. I watched the faces of my colleagues, people my father had mentored and cared for, people who'd believed in his vision. I saw their disappointment, their frustration, their growing awareness that something was wrong. After the meeting, Uncle Richard stopped me in the hallway. "Maya, we need to talk about your future here." We went to his office, my father's office, now decorated in cold chrome and glass where there had once been warm wood and family photos. "This arrangement isn't working out," he said, not bothering with pretense anymore. "You're a distraction. People keep coming to you with questions instead of going through proper channels. It's undermining Derek's authority. People come to me because I know how to help them." I said quietly, "Be that as it may, we're going to have to let you go. Of course, you'll receive a generous severance package." He named a sum that was insulting, barely enough to cover 2 months of rent. "We'll announce it as a mutual decision. You can say you're pursuing other opportunities." He slid the paperwork across the desk. A separation agreement, already prepared. They'd been planning this. I looked at my uncle, this man my father had trusted, had loved, had made his partner and executor. "Does it bother you at all?" I asked. "What you're doing?" "I'm running a business, Maya. Something you're too naive to understand. Your father was sentimental. He let emotions cloud his judgment. That's why the company needs real leadership now. My father built something meaningful. You're dismantling it for parts." "Your father is dead," Richard said flatly. "And you need to accept that this isn't your world anymore. Sign the papers. Move on with your life. Find a nice corporate job somewhere that you're actually qualified for." I stood up, leaving the papers on his desk. "I'll think about it." His expression hardened. "You have until tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll have to terminate you for cause. And trust me, that won't look good on your resume." That night, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Lisa Chen, the HR director who'd been wrongfully terminated. The second was to Marcus, the senior architect who'd just been fired. The third was to my father's oldest friend, James Sterling, who'd been his original business partner before retiring 5 years ago, and who still held a small percentage of company shares. I told them everything. I shared my documentation, and I asked for their help. "Your father was like a brother to me," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "What Richard's doing, it would break his heart. Tell me what you need." What I needed was a corporate attorney, which James provided. What I needed was a forensic accountant, which Lisa had contacts for. What I needed was courage, which I found in the memory of my father teaching me to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. Instead, I went to the offices of Morrison and Price, the law firm James had recommended. I met with Jennifer Morrison herself, a sharp woman in her 50s, with a reputation for taking down corrupt executives. I showed her everything: the embezzlement, the self-dealing contracts, the wrongful terminations, the stolen intellectual property. She listened, asked pointed questions, and took meticulous notes. "This is substantial," she said finally. "As a minority shareholder and former employee, you have standing to file a derivative lawsuit on behalf of the company. We can also pursue criminal charges for the embezzlement. This won't be quick, and it won't be easy. Are you sure you want to do this?" I thought about my father, about his integrity, about the values he taught me, about the employees who were being exploited, about the legacy that was being destroyed. "I'm sure." 2 weeks later, Richard, Patricia, and Derek were served with legal papers. The lawsuit alleged breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement, fraud, and wrongful termination. It was accompanied by a complaint to the state attorney general's office, detailing the financial irregularities. I didn't file it for revenge, I filed it for justice. There's a difference. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The board, which had been largely hands off, suddenly called an emergency meeting. James Sterling, who they still respected, attended and presented the evidence. Richard was suspended pending investigation. Patricia was immediately terminated. Derek, who legally had no protected position, was fired on the spot. The local business press picked up the story. Software company founder's family accused of embezzlement read the headlines. Then the industry publications got involved. Then, because the amounts were significant and the betrayal was so egregious, the mainstream media. I didn't speak to reporters. I didn't gloat. I went back to work, this time as the court-appointed interim manager while the investigation proceeded. The board, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal and perhaps feeling guilty for not having provided proper oversight, voted unanimously to support my leadership. My first act was to rehire Marcus, Jen, and Lisa. My second was to restore the innovation department and kill Derek's bastardized version of my AI project so we could start fresh, doing it right. My third was to call an all-hands meeting. I know these past few months have been difficult, I told the assembled employees. My father built this company on principles of integrity, innovation, and respect. We lost sight of those principles, but we're going to find our way back. No more secrets, no more favoritism, no more stolen credit. We're going to build something we can be proud of again. The investigation took 2 months. The forensic accountants found that Richard had embezzled over $800,000 through his shell company contracts. Patricia had put nearly $200,000 in fabricated consulting fees into accounts controlled by her friends, who kicked back a percentage. Derek had been using company credit cards for personal expenses, including a vacation to Bali that he claimed was a business development trip. The Attorney General filed criminal charges. Richard and Patricia faced felony embezzlement charges. Derek, because he was technically an employee and the amounts were smaller, faced misdemeanor fraud charges. Their lawyers tried to negotiate plea deals. James Sterling, as a shareholder, refused to agree to any settlement that didn't include full restitution and jail time. The civil trial was scheduled for 8 months out, but it never made it to court. 3 days before the trial date, Richard's lawyer called Jennifer Morrison. They wanted to settle. The settlement was comprehensive. Richard, Patricia, and Derek would surrender all shares in the company and pay full restitution plus damages. Richard's house, Patricia's car, Derek's condo, all sold to pay the debt. They were also required to publicly admit wrongdoing and were barred from ever holding corporate positions in any capacity. The criminal cases proceeded separately. Richard pleaded guilty to embezzlement and received 3 years in prison and 5 years probation. Patricia pleaded guilty to fraud and received 18 months and probation. Derek, with no priors and smaller amounts, got probation and community service, but the conviction meant he'd never work in corporate America again. I didn't attend the sentencing hearings. I was too busy running the company my father had built, the company that was now legally, officially mine. The board had voted unanimously to grant me majority control, using company funds to purchase the shares that Richard had forfeited. 6 months after the settlement, I stood in the conference room where this had all begun. James Sterling was there, along with the board, the department heads, and key employees. We were celebrating our best quarter in company history. The AI project, rebuilt from the ground up with proper attribution and team collaboration, had just secured 3 major contracts. Lisa Chen approached me with a glass of champagne. "Your father would be so proud," she said. "I hope so," I replied. "He would be. Not just because you saved the company, but because of how you did it. You didn't let bitterness consume you. You didn't seek revenge. You just stood up for what was right." She was right, though I hadn't thought of it that way. I hadn't plotted revenge. I'd simply refused to let injustice stand unchallenged. I documented the truth and let the truth speak for itself. Karma, if you believe in such things, had done the rest. That evening, I sat in my father's study, my study now, and pulled out the note I'd found in his papers. "Maya, majority share. She's ready." "I hope I was ready, Dad," I said to the empty room. "I hope I made you proud." In the end, Uncle Richard lost everything: his reputation, his freedom, his family's respect. The last I heard, he was working as a night manager at a storage facility after his release, the only job he could get with a felony record. Aunt Patricia had moved to Arizona to live with her sister, too ashamed to show her face in our city. Derek was working at a car dealership, selling used sedans to people who didn't know his history. I didn't take pleasure in their downfall. If anything, I felt a deep sadness at the waste of it all. They'd had legitimate roles, legitimate respect. They could have honored my father's memory and been part of something meaningful. Instead, they'd chosen greed and cruelty, and those choices had destroyed them. But I'd learned something profound through it all. Karma isn't about revenge or cosmic justice in some mystical sense. Karma is simply the natural consequence of actions. When you build on lies and theft, your foundation is unstable. Eventually, it collapses. You don't need to push it. Gravity does the work. Truth is patient, truth is persistent, and truth, in the end, always finds a way to surface. I expanded Sterling Digital Solutions into new markets. I established a foundation in my father's name to provide scholarships for women in technology. I created a company culture based on transparency and merit, where people were promoted based on their contributions, not their connections. And every morning when I arrived at the office, I passed by a portrait of my father that I'd hung in the lobby. In it, he's smiling, proud, confident. Beneath it, a small plaque reads, "Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching." David Sterling, founder. 3 months after they forced me to work for free, trying to keep me busy and compliant while they looted my inheritance, karma had indeed given me the last laugh. But it wasn't really laughter, it was something deeper, more meaningful. It was peace. It was justice. It was the knowledge that my father's legacy lived on, not in the building or the bank accounts, but in the principles I upheld every single day. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply living well, standing firm in your truth, and letting the natural order of the universe sort out the rest. Wrong does not triumph in the end, no matter how powerful it seems in the moment. It collapses under its own corruption. And the innocent, the patient, the persistent, they don't just survive, they prevail. I prevailed, not because I was vengeful or cunning, but because I was my father's daughter, because I knew the difference between right and wrong, because I had the courage to stand alone when it mattered most. That's not karma giving me the last laugh. That's just the truth finally being heard. And truth, in the end, is the most powerful force there is.